Kia ora. I think we're on. Welcome. I'm Ralph Johns. I'm the president of the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects, and I'll be hosting this webinar this evening. But before we get started, the webinar is going to be about cross-border collaboration in landscape architecture, building bridges. I just want to start with something that we do here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Te Reo Māori is the other language that we speak here, and I'm just going to begin and end the presentation with a short karakia. Karakia is a sort of an incantation or a prayer. So whakataka te hou ki te uru, whakataka te hou ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina te uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, tihe I Māori ora. Okay, welcome again. We do a thing in Te Ao Māori called Whanaungatanga, and that is all about connections and relationships and respect and building on shared experiences. So very much I think that's what we're having the chance to do this evening. It's 8 o'clock here, 8 o'clock in the evening in New Zealand. And we're connecting with all of you all over the Asia Pacific region. And today is International Day of Friendship. So that works well, inspiring peace and building bridges. So yeah, very, very cool to have our institute. We have about 700 members here in New Zealand connecting with the IFLA-APR region and making connections with each other. So we've got a couple of speakers tonight. We've got Henry from LandLAB, and we've got Andre Keegan and UN from Victoria University of Wellington, which is also running a program in China. So I'll introduce the speakers before we get to them in a minute. But first, I thought I'd just take you on a very quick tour of New Zealand, super, super fast, so buckle up. Our main city, we're going to be going north to south. There's two main islands and some smaller islands below. At the top of towards the top of the North Island is our biggest city, over 2 million people, of Tāmaki Makaurau in Auckland. And it's in the middle of a volcanic field, a live volcanic field, an incredible place. As you move south, you move through a whole lot of rolling farmland. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, this looks a little bit like the Shire. And then also, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, you get to Mount Noirahoi and Tongariro and Ruapehu, and there's Mount Taranaki as well in the center of the North Island. All incredible landscapes, and a lot of geothermal activity around Rotorua from old explosion craters. As you move down to the bottom of the North Island, you get to where I live and where most of our speakers are tonight, in Te Whanganui-a-Tara in Wellington. Here there's a port, and you jump on the ferry across the Cook Strait to the South Island. One of the roughest pieces of water in the world. Once you get back onto land, you're in a landscape of hills, mountains, and a huge wine growing region in Marlborough. Keep going south and you've got the spine of the Southern Alps running right down the center of the island with our tallest mountains on the Alpine Fault. And our third big city, the main city of the South Island, is Ōtautahi, Christchurch, which is recovering now about 15 years after a major earthquake. And then we're going to finish our journey at Milford Sound, a glacier-carved flooded valley down in Fiordland at the bottom of the South Island. So this is we live in a place that is very dynamic landscape. It's a very young landscape. It's only been inhabited, I think it was the last big landmass on Earth to be inhabited by humans, and people came across the Pacific less than 1,000 years ago. So quite an amazing place. Welcome to New Zealand. So Henry, we're going to start with, we've got 2 talks and they'll be about 25 minutes each. And then we'll have time at the end for questions and discussion. So really this topic is around how we work across borders. So New Zealand is this isolated island in the middle of the Pacific, but we aren't so isolated actually. I think the fact that we are geographically separated makes us even more keen to know what's going on in other parts of the world, and to learn from other parts of the world, and maybe we've got something that we can share and give back. So Henry is a founder of a practice called LandLAB, and he's going to talk about one particular project tonight, which he's been doing in Auckland, our biggest city, where he's been collaborating with local Indigenous people, the Māori, and tapping into their Indigenous knowledge systems, as well as reaching out to New York, where he's been collaborating with SCAPE. So I'll hand over to you, Henry. Take it away. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Ralph. Let me just try and figure out how to do this again. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes, just coming up now. That looks great.
Yeah. Well, firstly, kia ora koutou katoa, ko Henry Crothers, toko ingoa, ko LandLAB Himayana. My name's Henry Crothers. I'm the design director of LandLAB, and as Ralph said, I'm going to talk about this project called Te Ara Tukutuku on the waterfront in Auckland in New Zealand, and a project that we've been collaborating really closely from a design sense with SCAPE Studios from New York, as Ralph mentioned, but also I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of unique collaborative process that we've been through on this project as well, in terms of working with our First Nations peoples and and our client as well. And I guess in the spirit of talking about cross borders, it's probably a good place to start is just to acknowledge that the knowledge and kind of intelligence that's informed this project has started with our Indigenous people who who migrated and navigated their way across the entire Pacific to ultimately find their place in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so I guess there's a bit of a theme to this project, which I'll touch on the way through, and it kind of starts there with that very incredible depth of knowledge about the land and the sea and the ocean and navigating and of place. I guess this in the first instance, this is the kind of urban waterfront of Auckland, or Tāmaki Makaurau as we call it. And on the right hand side, I'm not sure if people can see my pointer, but our project is this headland at the northern end of what's called the Wynyard Quarter, which is an urban regeneration project to the west of the central city. And I guess this is a really significant project for Auckland, and in fact I guess for New Zealand as well, given that Auckland is our largest city and the kind of gateway to New Zealand for many people. And so our waterfront has been evolving and transforming over the last 10 or 20 years quite significantly, and this project is a real sort of anchor project for the ongoing transformation of the waterfront. And as is the case often with these kind of projects, this is not a new project in a certain sense. I know that I first started working in the Wynyard Quarter years and years ago in the mid 2000s, and working on the urban design framework and the sort of initial concepts for how this whole kind of precinct might play out. And at that point in time, the idea that there would be a project, that there would be a park as the sort of iconic moment or kind of place on this waterfront was sort of established, back in the early 2000s. And then, a whole range of things have happened since then. And there was, in 2012, there was a wider kind of lens put on the waterfront about how do we develop a wider strategy for Auckland's waterfront. And that was the Auckland Waterfront Plan. And then a few years later, there was a plan change, and particularly in relation to this site that I'm going to talk about, and it kind of flipped that the allocation of sort of built form and public open space on this site around a little bit, and that kind of kicked off perhaps the process of sort of where we're at today. And on the back of that, I'd like to point out that our client, Auckland Council, and their development agency, Iki Panuku, which is now called the Auckland Urban Development Office, did a really great piece of work to kind of and sort of imagine what this headland could be in terms of the public open space quality and the built form and what the sort of high level vision was. And then we were commissioned in 2022 to work on this project as part of a competitive process, and we partnered in that process with SCAPE Studios, who I'm sure people know of Kate Orff, who is obviously one of the leading landscape architecture lights in the industry at the moment. And we started working on that project in 2022. We've subsequently kind of worked through a concept design phase and a develop design phase, and we've started lodging the kind of consents and things that will enable this project to move forward, and currently on the site now is some of the early works or the enabling works that are looking to get the site ready for this kind of project to happen. And so I thought what I was going to do is just talk about the project for a while, because I think it's a pretty interesting project. And then at the end of that, I'll come back and talk a little bit about, I guess, some of the themes of this talk around cross-border collaboration and some of the sort of processes and observations that we've made on this project. So this is the project. This is a 10-hectare site on the waterfront. This is all reclaimed land. This is sort of showing that 10 hectares is roughly 5 hectares of public open space and 5 hectares of future sort of mixed use development. So there'll be a combination of food and beverage and commercial and residential happening out on the site, as well as maintaining some existing kind of working waterfront and marine industry activity on the site. But the real story, I guess, about this project is kind of about this landscape, and Ralph showed the beautiful image before of Tāmaki or Auckland with the this volcanic field, which is what these sort of red dots are, these volcanic cones that sort of are distributed across the isthmus of Auckland, and the harbour. And and I guess to a certain extent, the story of this project starts many years ago, and before Auckland, was settled and colonised as a city. Our indigenous people, the Māori, occupied this waterfront, and in particular, they occupied the headlands, which provided these sort of vantage points to the harbour, and the bays, which provided access out into the water, that was kind of their place. And then, when Auckland was colonised and settled, there was over a period of time a really significant kind of program of reclamation to sort of establish the current Auckland urban waterfront. So this kind of light blue stuff with a white outline is the current kind of urban edge of Auckland. So all these bays were infilled, and material was taken from land and put out into the sea to create, new land for industry, for commerce, for port activity. And effectively, what that did is kind of landlock all of these really significant sites that once sat along the original foreshore. And then obviously as the city expanded, those significant sites were sort of, pushed out. And so really, I guess this project is an opportunity to sort of symbolically bring back that idea of our Indigenous people having a place on the waterfront, and of a place where they can occupy that and be present and be seen as as an important part of our culture, and kind of give back what's kind of been taken away. And so I guess that's sort of where this project starts. And this is the site in its sort of former situation. It was a reclaimed headland. It was built purposely for extractive petrochemical and bulk liquid industries. And so, the site's very unhealthy and very unwell, and it's very contaminated. Those industries, Mobil and BP, have had kind of leases on the site for a long time, and they've now moved on, and they have taken away all of their infrastructure. Unfortunately, whilst they've vacated the site, the consequence of their activity on the site for a number of years is that the site is incredibly contaminated, and it's pretty sick and unwell. But what we are wanting to achieve with this project is to make this place well again, and to create a new destination for Auckland, and we think it's a really important project, not just for Auckland, but for New Zealand internationally. And so the name Te Ara Tukutuku is a metaphor for the canoe, and I guess the canoes arrived at this place between land and sea and connected the water and the land and the sky all together. And that's the sort of underlying narrative of this project, is that we make a place that can do all of those things again. I'll talk about our kind of collaboration a bit more later on, but I think it's really at the outset of this project was really fundamentally this idea of partnership. And it's a kind of three-way partnership between Auckland Council, on the left-hand side there, and the various components of Auckland Council, but led by the Auckland Urban Development Office, but with inputs from the Economic Development Unit, Tātaki, who are the events, Auckland Transport, who manage transport, Healthy Waters, and other people that input into that. And I think really uniquely on this project, we had the wider collective of mana whenua and the 13 tribes represented across Tāmaki working with us on this project. And normally, I guess, in terms of how we work in New Zealand, we would often be collaborating with First Nations people, but we might get one or two or three of this group in helping us work through a project. But because of the significance of this project, we have been working collaboratively with all 13 representatives of these different tribes. And this project started kind of before us, and in terms of our own kind of collaboration on the right-hand side, we formed a team, had the name Toi Waihanga, which kind of effectively means kind of a collective. And within our team, we had ourselves, LandLAB, as lead consultants. We worked with SCAPE Studios, landscape architects out of New York, Becca, who are engineers, Dunn, who are planners, Mott McDonald, who are engineers, but also we work with Lucy Tukua, who's a regenerative design practitioner. We have Warren Mahoney on architecture, Fresh Concepts, who do placemaking, Tātaki, who are an Indigenous-led marine ecologist consultancy, Morpham Environmental, who are engineers in green infrastructure, Uru Whakaro, who are Indigenous ecologists, RLB, who are crunching numbers, and RCP project managers. So the sort of perhaps not cross borders, but definitely cross disciplines and multidisciplinary in terms of that approach. And I think the interesting thing about this project is it had sort of started before we joined the team, and so we as a consultant team, I guess, came into an existing partnership with Auckland Council and Mana Whenua, and that's really informed the process as we move forward. This is a blank piece of paper, and I think it's probably fair to say that in terms of how we work, often, particularly when we're collaborating with First Nations peoples in New Zealand, is that it's important to not go off and design a project and then come and sort of ask them later on what they think of it. We're in a partnership. We have a treaty in terms of how we work together, and so for us, and certainly in terms of this project, it's really important that we start the project effectively with a blank sheet of paper, and that's about not jumping off and designing something, but it's also about kind of taking the time to listen and to learn and understand and design a process of how we're all going to work together before we design a project. And I think the process we've been through on this project has been a little bit different. I guess a typical project, you do concept design, you develop design, you do detailed design, and then you build something. And on this project, we introduced some early phases to this project. So we had what we called a discovery interpretation phase, where we just sat collectively as a group and talked and listened and kind of translated and interpreted what this project could be and what it should be and how people might experience that. And we had a series of workshops where we looked at these kind of themes up here in terms of what are the procedures that we're going to go through. How do we work together? What are the cultural outcomes we're trying to achieve? What are the environmental outcomes we're trying to achieve? What are the sort of functional outcomes we're trying to achieve? And what are the emotional kind of things we're trying to achieve for this project? What do we want people to kind of experience on the ground? And that was, so that's before we're designing anything, we're listening and working together and getting to know each other as people. And the outcome of that was to sort of translate all of that into a reverse brief, and that reverse brief, was driven by sort of listening and understanding, and then turning that into sort of outcomes and approaches and experiences, and then after that, we kind of went into this kind of visioning phase where we translated all of what we've heard and discussed together into a design idea, and then we've subsequently moved into a more conventional kind of concept design, develop design, detailed design phase. But I think what's been really important about this project is underpinning all of this has been the idea that it's been driven by a regenerative design methodology, and so we have a specialist regenerative design consultant working with us on the project. At LandLAB, we have people who are also experts or have been trained in regenerative design that are helping support that process. We have a document called Māori Tukutuku, which is an indigenously led sustainability framework. So we're not looking at LEED or Green Star or Living Building Challenge as kind of tools to tell us how to do sustainability on this project. This is a kind of indigenously led methodology for how we kind of do that, and also supporting that is this a genuine kind of co-governance approach to this project, where we're all sort of equal partners in the project and participating in terms of how we make decisions and when we make decisions and who makes decisions, and reviewing design work and kind of how we move forward. And I think that's been really it's been a different process perhaps to how we've worked before, but I think it's been kind of incredibly valuable. And I guess in the context of the theme of this talk, I know we're sort of talking about international collaboration, but I think this cultural collaboration has probably been the most sort of influential part of this project. And, there's a couple of images. I mean, before we started jumping into designing things, we spent a lot of time listening and talking and having hui or workshops about what this project could be, and sort of documenting all of what we heard into a process that we could all collectively kind of stand behind. And out of that, I guess, became, a few key things emerged, that this project really is about restoring the land, the water, and the people, and those things kind of all interact. And in Māori, that is muri, which is the sort of life force of the place. And I guess what became really important is this is a really sick site, and we need to make it well. And so bringing back that life force becomes really important. And then how do we do that? Well, I guess we came up with these kind of concepts of, firstly, we've got to make the site well again. And that's about healing the site and getting rid of all the contamination and all of the bad stuff that's in the ground, and making it well and safe so that we can bring people back to the site. And then once we've done that, and only once we've done that, can we start to talk about this idea of forming or making this place and giving it shape and defining the spaces and places that sit within this headland. And then acknowledging that, this project also over time will allow the cultivation of ecology and people and place and activation, and putting this in a sort of, a broader context. And then importantly, now soon eventually is sort of really important as well, that and we've sort of framed everything we were doing on this project around these phases. So now is, the things we need to do immediately to get the project going and to achieve momentum, and, to heal the site and start to, build momentum towards a project that's going to take a few years to build. And soon, which is kind of looking at, the early phases of this project, decontaminating the site, forming this landscape, upgrading seawalls and all those sorts of things, and acknowledging that, this place won't be rich and abundant and successful for, say, 5 to 10 years from now. And so these sort of, 3 by 3 by 3 kind of 9 ideas sort of became the underpinning ideas behind the entire project. The cultural collaboration, has informed, a whole lot of things on this project, and it's not just the kind of values and outcomes that sit underneath that, but I think sort of spatially, there's some ideas about the canoe, as I mentioned earlier on, and then working through this idea of the hoi, which is the paddle from the canoe. And this, links all the way back to the narrative of the project as Te Ara Tukutuku, but also all those ideas I mentioned in the first slide about, how people came to be here in terms of navigating across the Pacific in canoes. And so the paddle, when it's kind of laid out across the site, starts to influence the kind of spaces and the names and the activities that occur across the project. And so I'm just going to quickly kind of run through. This is the outcome. We've got a really flat site that's been, reclaimed, and we want to build this headland with all of this topography and rich kind of ecology. And so there's, and we've worked through all of this with the experts that we've been working with, our own experts and Indigenous experts, in terms of levels and topography, in terms of slopes, and in terms of how water works through the project, in terms of ecology and the different zones and things that support this project, and how we build it, in terms of the methods and the strategies that will enable this to be this incredibly sort of high performing landscape, which is creating a new headland that sits in the context of the harbour, but also kind of holds a program of other uses and activities within it. And this is a I guess at the centre of the site is a kind of flexible space that looks back to the city. This is a place you can come to kick a ball, or you can have an event, or you can kind of run a range of activities. But the topography also establishes this headland where you can look out to the wider landscape of Auckland and Tāmaki, and connect to those views of the harbour. I think there's been a lot of work done on sort of how we manage these three different edge conditions on the project. On the west side, we've got this kind of what we call the coves, where we're taking a flat site, turning it into this really rich and layered edge condition, which kind of looks like that. On the northern edge, we've got deeper water, and it's kind of different. We take, again, a flat site, and we're building in this kind of headland topography and the experience of being kind of sitting underneath a headland landscape, but looking out to the water. And on the eastern side of the site, we've got a more urban edge condition, but we've been a wharf, but we're looking at taking away that wharf, and we kind of reconnect the site back to the water, and let it connect directly to the water rather than being interrupted by a wharf. And so we get this sort of rich marine ecological zone, access to the water with some tidal stairs, swimming pools, access from water for boats. This is the connection from the southern part of the site out to this headland. There's some, I guess, part of what we're doing was public realm led, but also built form led. So I guess we realised this project as being landscape led. We developed some strategies for architecture in terms of what could fit within this envelope, and what our strategies would be to kind of break the scale of that down to activate the ground floor of the project. And we sort of realised we're not that interested in sort of what happens above in these blocks, but we're really interested in what happens in the lower two levels of the project in terms of the fine grain and the laneways and the activation of the public realm. And importantly, we sort of introduced this new kind of public interface between the park and the headland, where we've got a whare waka, which is a cultural kind of building that accommodates the canoes, a pavilion, and a community building that starts to create this kind of layered edge to the headland. And you can kind of see that in this image here. And that's a kind of key change that we'd made from the original master plan. So when you arrive at this space, you're in a kind of plaza where there's no cars, and you open out onto a space that's connected to the headland beyond. And if you're looking back from the headland, you see built form and activation that's activating the park. So I think, this is a really important project for Auckland, and I think we've kind of learned a lot that we can also apply, more broadly kind of across the waterfront. And in terms of thinking about cross borders, I think one of the things for this project has been thinking beyond the borders of just this site, and thinking about the broader regenerative systems of the land that sits behind the site and the harbour, and the sort of ecological systems within the harbour, and how this project kind of brings those things together. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of collaboration and the theme of this talk. Where, as Ralph said at the beginning, New Zealand's at the bottom of the world, and there's some good things and bad things about that, and you can sometimes feel like you look at the bottom of the world, but at the same time, I feel like we have the opportunity when we're in New Zealand to look up at the rest of the world and kind of learn things, and see what people have done well and see what people haven't done well, and that can inform our thinking. And it's probably fair to say that New Zealand is a relatively small place, and we don't get a lot of large-scale commissions, and so we do look to other parts of the world, and particularly Australia, Asia and Europe and North America for places that have done things that we don't do very well or don't do often, and we look to learn from those places in terms of, I guess, some of the typologies of projects, and approaches to those projects. And so I guess just finishing up and talking about how we've sort of worked with SCAPE, who are they're based out of New York, but they've also got offices in New Orleans and in San Francisco. LandLAB, we have offices in Tāmaki and Auckland, and recently an office in Melbourne in Australia. And I think, we're all kind of learning from our context. And I know this project was appealing for SCAPE because of the process and the way that we kind of approached it. And it was, certainly appealing for us to work with SCAPE to learn about some of the things that they do. Everything's a kind of collaboration. So this is my gang at LandLAB. And in terms of working with SCAPE, on the left is Kate, who runs SCAPE. On the right is Tama Whiting, who is a Vic Uni alumni. And when we started this project, he was based in Wellington in New Zealand. And so it was this really nice kind of connection, from New York to New Zealand and to Auckland through Kate and Tama on this project. I think if people haven't come across Kate's book, which is sort of awesome, I think please go and have a look at that. I think one of the things we felt about this project was that we knew from our point of view what we wanted to achieve on this project, but we kind of, and probably it's the case for most practitioners in New Zealand, we couldn't sort of draw on 3 examples of where we've done all of this stuff before. And I think one of the the really incredible things about SCAPE is that they have participated in these processes that are sort of ecologically and participatory led a lot, and they can kind of demonstrate that, partly through the book and the work they've done around coastal resilience and climate adaptation and ecologically led processes and participatory processes. Has been really important, but and also in terms of delivering projects on the ground. And so I think it was a really valuable and interesting kind of collaboration that kind of worked really well despite the kind of distance, I guess, between Auckland and New York. But I think having Tama, who understands and knows New Zealand and can help kind of provide some of that context in terms of SCAPE's input was kind of really valuable. And then I guess just on my last few slides, I think and everyone's seen these sorts of slides before of people working kind of collaboratively and together. But I think in the spirit of sort of working across borders, I think this process and project's been really quite different and informative for everyone involved, in the sense that we work from the outset with, as I mentioned at the beginning, the partnership between council and mana whenua and ourselves as a consultant team. And so this image is showing some of our team and Tama and Scott and some of our mana whenua representatives and our council representatives, all kind of working together and in the room all the way through this process. This is a shot of one of our, I guess, engagement sessions where we're out there talking to stakeholders in the community about the project. And I think what's been really important about that is that we've done that collectively and collaboratively. So it's Jared, one of our mana whenua specialists, advising us on marine ecology, and we've got Kate on the left, and Martin and Mervyn and Lucy on the right. And so it's been really important that we present this project collectively and together, and we've worked through that. That sort of idea has worked through all of our processes as well around engagement and workshopping and participation with the community and the public. And then just to wrap up, because I realise I've gone over time, is I think we've been really fortunate over the last little while to receive some international acknowledgement of this project, and I think from a New Zealand context, it's incredibly rewarding and kind of reinforcing to us at the bottom of the world to receive those kind of international acknowledgements of not just the project in terms of what it's proposed as a design, but I guess also in terms of the process, because I think the way that we've gone about this project has certainly been different and unique. And I think that's credit to the partnership between council and their team and Mana Whenua and our own consultant team, that we were able to achieve that recognition for the project. So thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I'm sure, I know a bit about this project, but I found that really inspiring, as I'm sure everybody else will too, and we'll have a discussion at the end. Just one quick question, Henry. If people want to book tickets to New Zealand and come and have a look at that, when should they plan on coming?
Yeah.
How many more years do you have to go?
Very good question, Ralph. As is often the case with these projects, it's a little complicated at the moment, but there's work starting on site now, and that's great. If I was being an optimist, I'd say come in 3 or 4 years. If I was being more realistic, I'd say 2030 something.
2030 something. That's a good answer. Awesome. Thanks, Henry. We'll stick around and we'll have a corridor later on. I'm just going to hang quickly now to Victoria University of Wellington. So that's where I'm based. The 2 out of 3 of these next speakers are here in Wellington. Keegan's up further up the North Island. When I first moved to Wellington 25 years ago, there was no landscape architecture program at Vic. Victoria University, I was part of making one. I'm really curious to hear how I know that program has gone from strength to strength, but how it came about that it's now replicated in Zhangzhou in China. So we're going to hear from Andre first, who knows how it came about, and then from Keegan and Yuan, who have both been teaching in the program in China. So over to you, Andre.
Thanks, Ralph. Great to have that introduction from you, doing New Zealand north to south, and the fundamentally important project from Henry about this important project in Tāmaki, the capital. So we're changing tack a bit. We're talking about crossing borders in an educational sense at the university level. So kia ora koutou. I'm Andre Brown. I'm a professor in architecture in the Faculty of Architecture and Design Innovation at Victoria University of Wellington. To continue the theme, to give it its Māori name, it is Te Ara Waka, which means the place where you can moor your canoes. So following on from the kind of information that Ralph and Henry have been giving you about New Zealand, it's kind of a way of saying you're welcome to come here and visit and stay. So that's what the Māori name for the university. We're talking about our current project, which is a major project for the university, which is a joint institute in China, in Zhangzhou. And we're going to do that in 3 parts. I'm involved with the management and the establishment of the Joint Institute. So I'll start by describing the genesis, the framework and the foundation of this project. Then I'll hand over to Ewan Sawyer, my colleague, who delivered the first teaching in landscape architecture at the Institute last year. And then finally, moving on to Keegan, who's delivered the most recent teaching in landscape architecture, where we'll try to tell you how we've developed the project, how we've moved as close as we can to delivering our intentions to bridge between the education in landscape architecture in China and what we deliver in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So Keegan's controlling this, so I and Ewan will be saying things like next. So this is what the Joint Institute looks like. It's a refurbished building on the old South Campus and it has the mandatory I Love Wellington Institute and the welcome. The top left is the logo, which is a mixture of the Victoria University of Wellington Te Ara logo and the Zhengzhou University logo. Next. Just to give you a background, there are 3 types of partnership universities in China. The largest is a single entity university called a joint venture. There are only 7 of those in China. I worked at one of them before moving to New Zealand. Ours is the intermediate one, which is a joint institute. There are about 150 of those in China. This is a college on an existing university campus, bringing together the the international partner and the Chinese partner. The smallest is just working together on a single program. Next. This again is a view of the campus. It's a very green campus. It's one of the attractions. The degree that we run is an undergraduate degree, and it's called 4+0. It's moving away from the tendency to have what we're called 2+2, where you do 2 years in China, 2 years in the international partner. The Chinese government have moved towards the idea of, as much as possible, the students staying in China and finding other ways to do the international integration. We don't teach in the first year. We only teach in second, third, and fourth year. We started teaching last year in September 2024, and the cohort size this year is 75, which is our target cohort for landscape architecture. The location, Ewan is going to talk about this a little more, so just quickly to place Zhengzhou, for those who aren't sure. In terms of latitude, somewhere in the middle between Shanghai and Beijing, but inland, away from the coastal strip, and in Henan province. Henan, many believe, is the birthplace. It's where the first dynasties began, and where you see China starting to evolve into the country that it is now. And it's, you could say it's on the Yellow River, but it's on the southern edge of that. It's conventional to start with 3 degrees in a joint institute. Our university has chosen to start with landscape architecture, architecture, and industrial design. They're all around 75 to 100 students in each one. Next one. As you can see, this is another part of the campus, the northern part of the campus, very green, a lot of water. The particular attraction for us as a university is that Zhengzhou University is very highly ranked. It's the only double first-class university in Henan province, which is a very large province. Double first class is the current classification. There were previous ones like 211, 985, but this is the current classification that picks out the most elite universities. It's the largest university in China with over 70,000 students on the campuses. Next. What we have to do in order to establish this joint partnership and structure the teaching is to firstly decide on how much of the course we will teach, how much they teach, the colleagues in Zhengzhou, and then how we split that teaching across the years. So moving from bottom to top, this is first year, second year, and third year. First year, we only have a couple of courses in landscape, and then we increase a lot in second and third year. So most of our delivery is in the second and third year, and we cover all of the landscape design studios. It was, as part of the collaboration, they were keen that they learned about how we teach design aspect of landscape architecture. And so they were keen for us to do all of the teaching in landscape in year 2, all of the teaching in year 3. I'm referring to our year 2 and our year 3, by the way. One of the challenges is trying to bring together the content from New Zealand and the content of China and trying to bring them together. And Ewan and Keegan will talk a bit more about that. But in a practical sense, one of the challenges and advantages is that the semesters in China at our partner are 16 weeks long rather than 12 weeks, which we have here in New Zealand. So it gives us more scope to do extra teaching and extra work on allowing that integration to take place. And the other thing that's worth pointing out is that we structured the courses that we teach so that we make sure that if the students want to, after they've finished their bachelor degree, come to New Zealand to do the master's degree, they've done everything that we expect them to do. So they get a dual degree, but we've been careful that what we deliver also ensures that they're suited to coming into the Master of Landscape Architecture. So top is the kind of compulsory photograph that you have at the start of launch of a joint institute, with the Vice Dean and Dean on the left, and then our 3 members of staff on the right. And then the lower picture, the 3 members of staff, 1 for industrial design, 1 for architecture. And if you hit the button again, yeah, the person on the right is Ewan Sui, who is the person who is our colleague at this campus in Victoria University of Wellington, Te Ara and he was the first person to deliver landscape architecture to the students starting in September last year. So I'm handing over now to Ewan to tell you about how we got this off the ground and what his work has involved at the Joint Institute.
Thank you, Andre. And kia ora, ko Ewan tako ingoa, no Aotearoa New Zealand and China oku tipuna. Hello everyone, my name is Ewan Cui, and who is a lecturer in landscape architecture from Victoria University of Wellington. And I'm also the one who is doing our joint institute teaching at Zhengzhou University. Today, I'd like to share some of my teaching experience at this joint institute in China. Next, please. For the location, next, please. It is located in the city of Zhengzhou and the capital city of Henan province, which is in the central north part of China. And the Zhengzhou is a very important transportation node, which is connecting almost everywhere in China. And this joint institute is based on the South Campus of Zhengzhou University, where our teaching takes place. And the next, please. For the campus life, next, please. The South Campus is their original main campus, as you can see all those big trees, right? Which create a very comfortable environment for all the students and the staff. Next, please. The lecture theaters are equipped with modern teaching technology, and the computer labs provide the students with access to the software needed for the design and the digital representation. Next, please. The studio is probably the place we spend most of our time, as our teaching follows the same studio-based approach that we use at Victoria University. Students spend a lot of time discussing ideas, developing concepts, receiving feedback, and presenting their work. Having these facilities allows us to deliver teaching in a very similar way that we do here in Wellington. And then next, please. For the teaching, beside the studio teaching, we also deliver lecture-based courses. Because of the large number of students, lectures provided the foundation, while tutorial sessions gave students opportunities to apply what they have learned. It's interesting to see how students adopted to a more interactive teaching style over time. Next, please. This year is the second year we welcome all those Joint Institute students coming to our university in New Zealand. And for many of them, it's also their first overseas study experience, and which makes it very meaningful. During their visit, the students participate in a wide range of activities. They explore our different campus, visit our teaching facilities, attending workshops, auditing different studio-based or lecture-based courses, and experience the life in Wellington. This gives them the opportunity to experience our New Zealand learning environment, meeting our staff and students, and explore our campus and the city in Wellington. Next, please. Next one. Looking back over the past 2 years, I'm thinking the biggest lesson is that international education is never a one-way process. Of course, we bring our high quality of the studio-based teaching to China, but at the same time, we also learned a great deal of ourselves. Teaching students from different cultural and educational backgrounds encouraged us to reflect on our own teaching methods and think about how students learn in different contexts. China is also a culturally diverse country, so teaching there has given us a valuable perspective on diversity and inclusive education that we can bring back to our New Zealand. More importantly, this collaboration has helped us build a stronger relationship between colleagues, and this relationship has gradually expanded into the joint research opportunities and the publications. I believe this is only the beginning, and there will be many more opportunities for our future collaboration. That's it. Thank you.
Kia ora everybody. Cheers for that, Ewan. Just following on from him there, my name's Keegan. I'm a landscape architect at design group Stapleton Elliott based here in Aotearoa. And as I mentioned, I've spent the last 3 months teaching and following on from Ewan, delivering the SARC 112 landscape architecture course for the first year students over in Zhangzhou University, and building upon the work that's been going on behind the scenes over the last several years by Andre and a lot of the dedicated staff members. And I'll just quickly touch on what has kind of taken place and some key takeaways and learnings from, I guess, delivering that class. And as has been touched on, the two-way street that comes from, you know, an international engagement and international collaboration. So the teachings we're taking from Aotearoa and delivering, but also the learnings we get from interacting with such a ancient and I guess vast culture that we're not really exposed to in the same way in our island nation. So the class SARC 112 design processes is one of the first classes that students at VUW are exposed to, and it's a really fundamental one to the way in which we learn to design as architects, landscape architects, interior in Aotearoa. And so it's really crucial to try and convey, as Andre said, what is a fundamental way of teaching in New Zealand in a different context. So as Ewan's mentioned, a really heavily studio-based class with 1 lecture at the start of the week and then 2 studio sessions, and 45 students split between 2 streams. So I took the landscape stream and my friend Lexi took the architecture stream. You can see us there. This was a class we both started 10 years ago. I tutored this 5 years ago. So it was quite a very interesting and I guess fulfilling cyclical moment to now be able to lecture it and deliver it in an entirely different context from what I experienced it in, you know, almost a decade ago now. So the idea behind the class is to deliver a landscape-centric brief towards creating a social space and really focus less on the outcome, but rather the development of processes for an individual to learn how and why they design and how they can build upon, I guess, those methods and approaches across the rest of their educational journey, but also into their journey as designers in the real world. And I think it's really fitting, following on from what Henry spoke about really well earlier this evening, about how important process is to creating strong outcomes rather than just creating a design that's seemingly out of thin air. It's the work you put in that really adds that richness and depth and authenticity to design. And that's something that we really tried to convey to the students, and was really interesting to see them, I guess, grapple with that new approach. And so from there, I can just touch on some of the key outcomes and learnings we had. So following on from what I've just been saying, iteration versus refinement was a really interesting dynamic to navigate. A lot of the students were very fixated and laser focused on the first idea being the best idea by virtue of being first. So rather than engage with a full thought out design process, there was a tendency for the students to lock into a key idea early on and then try and spend the remainder of the semester focusing on that and refining that without any kind of exploration or iteration. And so this, I guess, drive for efficiency was really fundamental to the way in which they thought. Everything needed to be quickly decided upon so that therefore the time could be maximized to refine it. And so it was really cool to try and get them to take a step back, slow down, and remove themselves from the mantra of first is best. So getting them to really work on, explore different approaches, because design is best when we test it. So taking a very Kiwi-based approach to design of iterations and exploration, and all the failures helping to create a stronger success overall. And following on from that, I guess, kind of, in a way making sense, was a very metric-based approach to design was prevalent across almost all the students initially. They wanted to know what the exact metrics of the brief were, what bullet points and what features had to be incorporated, and sought advice from us and from the tutors as to a exact description of what we wanted them to design. And so it was interesting, I guess, seeing that approach to design that isn't exploratory or, I guess, self-identifying, but one that seeks to immediately fulfill all the stated goals. And so it was really cool watching them over the course of that semester and the project start to realize that we're not here to tell you what to design. We're here to give you the tools, examples, and encourage you. But the exploration and that failure and that eventual success is what's really important to creating good, fulfilling design. And so again, the outcome was just really championed at the start. But as you can see, getting them to do more process-based things, which is the entire purpose of the course, started to create some really cool opportunities for expression, rather than creating, a homogenous outcome for all the students. Because when given the same brief, if you're going to attack it as a metric kind of system, everything's going to appear the same. And so the depth and range that we're able to, I guess, coax out of the students by getting them to step back and slow down was really breathtaking to see how willingly they embrace that. And really, I guess, heartwarming to see how well design approaches in Aotearoa stack up to an international approach. Another really, really cool learning, and I think one that a lot of people in the industry can benefit from, is the communication barriers became a really good way for us as lecturers to step back and realize what we were doing. Because it is an English spoken and taught class, and a lot of the students are capable but not completely up to speed with a full speed English class, a lot of communication was delivered in a slower pace or through the assistance of translation apps. And so it really helped us to step back and avoid use of industry specific jargon, which is a trap I think we all too often fall into, using really technical and high level terms which aren't actually as accessible to lay people or people unfamiliar with industry. So as a learning there, as a lecturer, it was really, really important to, stand back and think about what we were really trying to say and to communicate. So it's a really good exercise for refining, but also understanding what core principles and what was the essence of what the teachings were and how best those could be delivered in a way that was easy to be understood. Another element there was the community-centric design was absolutely crucial from the start. And it was really encouraging to see all these students whose first time really engaging in a design process or a design studio. Community-led design was the primary focus without any coaxing from the tutors or the lecturers. And too often, I think, we in Aotearoa lead a design on its principles first and foremost, and then start to incorporate more communal elements, accessible elements, whereas these were at the forefront of every single design. And so seeing that in the first year of an education was a really, really cool takeaway. And it made me think about how much more we can be pushing that in the way we design, both in academia, but also in the way we practice in our studios. And a really broad topic, but I'll try and be succinct about it, is the incredible use of artificial intelligence. It's something that I think the academic world is slowly trying to come to grips with in terms of teaching and how to ensure it's used as a tool rather than as a solution. But the prevalence of artificial intelligence was in every facet of how students approach their tasks, from translating lectures and conversations through to idea generation, through to presentation and graphical elements. And so trying to navigate when it's being used as a tool and being controlled versus when it's being used as a replacement for a design process was a really interesting, I guess, challenge to navigate, and one that I think the university will be continuing to navigate, but something more to think on in terms of how we approach and how a good design process can't be replaced by just feeding something into a generator. Quickly touch on some of the external opportunities that were available. So it was really fantastic outside of the classroom to get to engage with the fellow professionals, all of whom were tenured architects and working at the university's own firms. So they were working both as professional academics, but also had a vast range of experience. And through that, we had the amazing opportunity to visit some ancient sites around the city, as well as a new tranche of housing, their 4th generation housing, which is currently in development. And so to be able to compare and contrast the speed with which they're building and the city is evolving towards an Aotearoa context was really breathtaking. How fast these buildings are going up and how, I guess, engaged people are in the design process. We also had the opportunity for a lot of cultural engagement. I was lucky enough to be over there for the Super Rugby semi-final, for the final, where my beloved Hurricanes managed to take out the Chiefs. And so that was a really cool opportunity to expose students to a sport, and I guess that kind of, Aotearoa culture, which they previously hadn't been aware of. And so luckily they were there for a good day. And it was also really cool just to explore what is, I guess, a completely contextually different city, a city of 13 million compared to, a country with a population of a quarter of that, and explore how that city is evolving and responding to the challenges of, climate, changes in population, changes in economy as well. So a couple of key takeaways from the time there are prioritization of community prevalent throughout all aspects, both in the classroom and outside in day-to-day life. Community focused and community centric design is everywhere. An incredible reliance on technology, having to coax students to use hand-drawn tools was something definitely new to me. So I think it's really a good reminder that those, soft skills and the use of a pen and paper and a sketch pad can't really be that easily replaced. I think that's a real good reminder there. The benefits of well-planned cities and infrastructure and transport is immediately obvious over there. Being able to cross a city the size of the Hawke's Bay region in 45 minutes via a metro station, it's just adds a level of accessibility to all elements of the population, which just really helps with equity. The criticality of landscape within a vertical city, where space that's flat and accessible is such a commodity, these spaces have to work much harder than they do in Aotearoa, something we take really for granted with our playgrounds and the spaces around us. And so seeing how much program can be incorporated and for how many people into such small spaces was really eye-opening. And when we were first setting up this meeting, Ralph spoke really well about how rare it is to get to step outside your context to allow for a proper reframing. And I think in many ways, this was a fantastic opportunity and will continue to be for other lecturers who go over there and other professionals who visit, a fantastic way to stand back and look at what is the academia and VUW providing and how does that stack up against an international course. How does it stack up, for people who live and work and design differently? And so I think it's a real luxury that we get here to be able to look at what we do through a different lens. And I think it's really important that that relationship continues between the two. But yeah, if I could leave with anything there, I think the Joint Institute is a fantastic initiative, and it's a real privilege to be able to interact with a culture which has such a beautiful, vast and storied history to it, but is also experiencing rapid economic and expansion, and how they navigate, the crucial nature of landscape within those cities. As you can see in that middle one, that combination of the history, but also that need for, economic development and industry. And so it's really cool to be able to engage and, I guess, in some ways, have an influence on the next generation of landscape architects who'll be able to shape that future for China. And hopefully we can learn as much from them as we are able to teach them. Cheers.
Thank you, Keaton. That was a great presentation from the three of you, and a great way to end. I'm just going to try and share my screen a second. Clickety-click. See if I can remember how to do this. Okay, there was a word I used earlier on. Try saying it for yourself. Whanaungatanga. And this is a concept of relationships, belonging, respect, and it doesn't happen straight away. So really, it's also about a process. It's about a process of building shared experiences and talking to each other and understanding stories. So again, I think that's what we're starting to do now. We're going to have a very hurried process over the next 10 minutes of actually having a bit of to and fro and discussion. Yeah, just to recap. So Henry, that was cultural collaboration is the thing that really stands out from that as being very unique and really pushing what's possible. It's not just a project for Auckland; it's a project for the whole of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And you talk of relationships and process, and then it's great to hear from you on the ground, Keegan, kind of actually delivering design studio with second years, but actually trying to instill the importance of process without being process driven. So how do you actually explore and iterate and listen? And yeah, it was really interesting to hear that sort of community-led thing coming out. So everybody, please put questions in the chat. I can get things going with a question that I got from Rob. Rob's in New Zealand. Henry, are you there?
Yeah.
Nice. So Rob's asking about a question. So you showed that the master planning, there's the beautiful open natural spaces of the Headland Park, and then a built area of the site, which is all master planned, and you'd worked out the massings and everything. Rob says apparently there's a building going for consent now that is quite a lot taller than anticipated. looking at your master plan, look at the timeline for that master plan. Things change over time. So master plans always evolve, and they're designed to evolve. So, have you got any thoughts on perhaps that Orams building in particular, but more generally, how a huge master plan like this should and could evolve over time and over economic cycles?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have to say I'm not I don't have a detailed understanding of that particular proposal, but I mean, I think, the master planning of the Wynyard Quarter sort of started in 2003, and I know there was some careful consideration of kind of massing and built form that we worked through over a number of years. I mean, I think, and it is 20 or so years ago. So I don't know. I mean, look, I think this is a really interesting dilemma, because if we were talking about a 62-metre tall building in another part of the world, everyone would be going, "What's the problem?" So, I think, what's changed in Auckland over the years has been, we need to, we just had plan change 120, we're looking at increasing density in the city centre and along our transit corridors. And so, I guess philosophically, I don't have an issue with increased density. I think the challenge with that particular proposal is, without knowing it in detail, is, what are the actual kind of effects of that. But, I think if the precinct is going to succeed, it needs, it needs people, right? And, the precinct's always been designed around, really good balance, in my opinion, between development and public open space, and particularly when you look at the broader context of Auckland city centre, which is sort of severely lacking in public open space. And, one of the things our project does is create the biggest new park in Auckland for over 100 years. And, so to, I guess, philosophically, perhaps to support that with some increased density, I don't have a kind of a problem with that, without knowing the sort of gory details of that particular project.
Nice.
And what it means.
Thanks, Henry. Keegan, you talked on this issue of kind of relationship between landscape and built density. Like, it sounds like it pretty much blew your mind coming from New Zealand to China, and just seeing the scale of the city. And what was the phrase you used about the landscape having to work a lot harder? Coming back to Aotearoa, what did you see differently in terms of the way that we build here, and density and height?
Yeah, I think it's almost like landscape, but bordering on urban design. We have such a luxury of space, but I think, I don't know, there's a Kiwi dream for, the little section. You got a side yard, backyard, and everything. And I think it's particularly prevalent here in Tauranga at the moment, where, the city centre is effectively, sadly, dying, but there's no move to densifying it. As Henry's just said, there's nothing wrong with some well-planned density, and there's a lot of projects going into creating these lovely spaces around Tauranga, and a lot of emphasis on it. But I think the key learning there is that without people to use it, those spaces aren't fulfilling their maximum potential. So I think, as much as designing good landscape is important, allowing the landscape to allow density as well is equally as crucial, because otherwise it's just an empty park.
Yeah, brilliant. We've got an awesome question here from Glenn in Singapore. And we could talk about this for hours. It's super relevant at the moment, with our planning laws changing, not for the better. With New Zealand being surrounded by beautiful nature, sensitive environments, as landscape architects and educators, how do you approach and implement the necessary EIA? So I think that's environmental impact assessments for your projects. How do we balance our cities with our natural landscapes? And how do we find that balance? At the moment, the government is on a big push to remove constraints, putting it simplistically, and enhance private property rights, which weakens environmental protections and potentially weakens the role of landscape architects in writing those environmental impact assessments. So it's a little bit of a crazy time for us here. Are you across this sort of stuff, Keegan, or Henry, Andre, Ewan?
I mean, I have a few thoughts on this, because I think there's this tension, right? We can carry on kind of sprawling out into our landscape, which we love so much, or we can kind of intensify. But we're sort of stuck in this dilemma between, we're in New Zealand, we're a bit afraid of density, right? So we don't deal with that very well. And I don't know. I think it's kind of, density is not a bad thing. I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. And I think when we talk about density in the context of other places, it's not very dense at all. And density done well is good. Like it's and I think we need to kind of put a bit of a positive kind of spin on that, because I think the consequence of not dealing with density and sort of pushing it away and saying it's too hard is that we'll actually end up undermining the quality of our kind of natural environment and our landscape, because we'll just be death by 1,000 cuts, and we're just pushing out and sprawling and doing this and doing that, and meat and veg housing everywhere, and I think that's actually the sort of the bigger risk. And I think we need to sort of embrace what's. I know that not everything that's sort of been currently pushed through is sort of necessarily good, but I think considering carefully how we do density means that we can get better cities. I mean, Central Wellington's a great example, and people are thinking about wanting to study at Vic and engage in that. Like it's a great, it's not high-rise, mid-rise, walkable, connected to the water, the city, like all those kind of good things that Central Wellington has is something that I think the rest of New Zealand could kind of embrace as well.
Yeah, I think on that, 100% agree. I think it's also, as you say, equally as important to protect those elements that are currently in our cities or on the edges, like the rivers and streams. Great example from Zhangzhou is right on the northern side of the campus is the Jinshui River, which was the focus of one of Ewan's projects and the one that my students were working on. And in the last 10 years, there's been a massive emphasis on essentially reconnecting to that river. Like it's been described as being a black river before, like it was so degraded, and it's not in great condition now, but there's been a lot of infrastructure put in to try and remediate and repair that. And as good as that is, there's no life in it, so it's very hard to get that back once it's been lost. So the density really important, but as you say, density done well, protecting those incredibly beautiful, natural and sensitive environments while we do it, so that we can have the best of both worlds rather than retroactively coming back. And it turns out Waitangi Stream's completely gone,
Before I moved to New Zealand, I mentioned I worked at Liverpool in Suzhou, and Suzhou experienced a massive boom from the 1990s, growing from 500,000 to 7 million or 14 million, depending where you draw the line. But that was a partnership designed for a new city in partnership with Singapore. It's the Singapore Suzhou Partnership. And it's amazing how well the green spaces have been retained. It's the end of the Grand Canal, the canal to Shanghai, the green spaces, cycle lanes, public art, all of those kind of things. The kind of things that Suzhou is famous for, the classical gardens, those are all retained and actually enhanced. So there are examples in China like the Suzhou SIP example that shows you can do densification even at China scale and retain the connection to land and water, the kind of things that Keegan mentioned about valuing landscape, families being able to use that landscape for relaxation, mental health, and all those other things that we know that landscape is important for. So I think there are examples that we can look at, and I think Suzhou is one of the better examples in that respect.
Well, here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we're well, there's only the population's 5 million, and we have this, we're spread very thinly over an incredible variety of landscapes. So that the trick is not taking those landscapes for granted and not wasting them. I can't remember what the population of Singapore is, but there's a large lake in the centre of our North Island called Lake Taupo, and that's exactly the same size as Singapore, and that always makes me, that's always my scale comparison. Yeah, so we do have these incredible landscapes. We are incredibly lucky because there's so few of us here, but that is changing, and it will change in the next 20 years, it will change in the next 50 years, it will change unbelievably and unrecognisably in the next 100 years. So at the moment, we're having to ask ourselves, what is as landscape architects, what is special? What do we need to fight for? What do we need to protect? As well as what do we need to regenerate? What do we need to restore? What do we need to put back? If you got any, I don't know if we've got any more time. I think we're out of time. If you got any more questions, fire them in quickly. There's one from Stephen right here in Wellington, asking Henry, will there be more collaboration with SCAPE? Have they invited you to New York and do some cool stuff?
I mean, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Oh, look, I mean, our project is kind of, moving forward slowly. So, we hope that collaboration continues, and we'd love to go and do a project in New York. I'm not sure it works like that, but and I'm sure that if there's sort of other projects that come up, we'd be more than happy to work with those guys. I think we've learned a lot. I know that we've learned a lot from them, but I also know that they've learned a lot from us in terms of what we talked about earlier around process and the importance of genuine and authentic First Nations engagement. And I know that's not something that happens everywhere in the world, and some places are really good at it. And I think it's one of the things that I know the influence of what we're doing in New Zealand kind of collectively is changing how things work in Australia and Canada and other parts of the world, and also potentially kind of North America. So I think hopefully there's opportunities for us to kind of work together before. But I think this kind of the collaboration is about sharing knowledge, right? And the conversations that come out of that, improve everyone's sort of understanding of some of these things. And I think one of the things that landscape architecture in New Zealand, I think, is kind of really good at is that, and being really embedded in place and culture. And for anyone wanting to kind of engage in that in this part of the world, I think we're a leader for sure in those things, and we're not necessarily a leader in some other things. I think sometimes we prioritize that over and above some other things, but I hope that there's more opportunity for us to collaborate in the future for sure.
Nice one. I think we'll leave it there. We are we're here. We do on this little island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, doing our thing quietly. But the way that we do it is actually quite unique. So although, as I said in my introduction, I think we're always learning, and we don't get the opportunities, Henry said, to work on that many to work on as many big and complex projects like the one he showed. So we're always learning from overseas, but in the process, I think we have a unique way of approaching things, and that's kind of what you talked about quite a bit as well, Keegan, is realizing the way that we do things here is worth sharing and teaching. So thank you to IFLA-APR for giving the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects an opportunity to present some stuff from our part of the world to you, and do a bit of whanaungatanga, a bit of connecting, building some relationships, and I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. I'm just going to close off with a final karakia and then say goodnight. Kia tō, kia tā koa katoa, te atawhai o te tātou ariki I hiu karatihi. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whingi tanga ki te wairua tapu ake amine. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks especially to our presenters tonight. Kia ora, good night.
Kia ora.
Thank you.